In the late summer of 1944, a wave of unbridled optimism swept through the Allied command. The breakout from the Normandy hedgerows, codenamed Operation Cobra, had been a spectacular success. The German 7th Army was shattered, its remnants fleeing from the cauldron of the Falaise Pocket. In their place, a torrent of Allied steel was pouring across the French countryside. At the tip of this spear was General George S. Patton's Third Army, an unstoppable force that was advancing with a speed that defied all predictions. They were covering 50, 60, sometimes 70 miles in a single day, swallowing territory and liberating towns in a triumphant blur. Victory didn't just feel possible, it felt imminent. It seemed the war could be over by Christmas. But this very success, this glorious, lightning-fast advance, was creating a crisis of catastrophic proportions. A modern, mechanized army is a ravenous beast with an insatiable appetite. It consumes rivers of gasoline, mountains of ammunition, and fields of food. For every mile it advances, a colossal logistical tail must follow, feeding the beast and keeping it moving. And as Patton's tanks tore towards the German border, that tail was being stretched to the breaking point. The front line was a rapidly advancing fire, but the supply line was a dwindling trickle of water, and the fire was about to burn itself out. The core of the problem was the utter devastation of French infrastructure. The Allied strategic bombing plan, executed flawlessly in the months before D-Day, had systematically annihilated the French railway system. The goal was to prevent the Germans from rushing reinforcements to Normandy, and it had worked perfectly. Now, in a bitter twist of irony, the Allies were the victims of their own success. The twisted rails and shattered bridges that had doomed the Wehrmacht were now strangling the liberators. Furthermore, the only major deep-water port in Allied hands was Cherbourg, and the retreating Germans had demolished it with vindictive thoroughness. The docks were mined, the cranes were toppled, and the harbor was littered with scuttled ships. This forced the Allies to rely on the temporary Mulberry harbors and the original landing beaches, a logistical nightmare of inefficiency. Military planners have a term for this: the tyranny of logistics. An army can only advance as far as its supplies can reliably reach it. By late August, Patton and the other frontline commanders were hundreds of miles from their supply depots in Normandy. Trucks were burning 5 gallons of fuel just to deliver 1 gallon to a tank at the front. The situation became desperate. Patton himself famously quipped, "My men can eat their belts, but my tanks have got to have gas." The most successful offensive of the war was grinding to a halt, not from German panzers or fortified positions, but from the simple, immutable fact of an empty fuel tank. Act 2. The highway to victory is forged. With the entire Allied strategy hanging in the balance, a group of planners from the Army's Transportation Corps, led by Colonel Lorne Little Patton Ayres, proposed a solution so ambitious, so audacious, that it had never been attempted on such a scale. If the railways were broken and the ports were crippled, they would create their own supply artery, a non-stop 24-hour-a-day militarized superhighway. They needed a name that signified absolute priority, a name that meant all other traffic must yield. They borrowed a term from American railroad slang for a priority shipment: the Red Ball Express. Beginning on August 25, 1944, the plan roared to life. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers commandeered a circular route of highways running from the supply dumps near Saint-Lô out to the forward logistics base at Chartres and back again. This created 2 massive one-way loops, exclusively for the use of the express. All civilian and unauthorized military traffic was banned. Along the route, engineers and military police put up signs emblazoned with a simple, unmistakable symbol: a solid red circle. This ball was the mark of the highest priority. It meant you did not stop, you did not slow down, and you did not get in the way. The sheer scale of the operation was breathtaking. At its peak, The Red Ball Express consisted of 132 truck companies, operating nearly 6,000 vehicles at any given moment. The workhorse of the fleet was the legendary GMC CCKW, the Deuce and a Half, a rugged 2.5-ton truck that would become an icon of American military logistics. These were joined by larger 10-ton Mack trucks for the heaviest loads. The rules of the road were as strict as any frontline command. Trucks had to travel in convoys of at least 5, maintaining a speed of 25 miles per hour and keeping a 60-yard interval between vehicles. Stopping was strictly forbidden. Special ordnance and maintenance depots were set up along the route, allowing for 10-minute breaks and emergency repairs, but the pressure was always on to keep moving. The great convoy roared without ceasing, a testament to industrial might and organizational genius. Act the third: the men behind the wheel. Yet, for all the talk of trucks and tonnage, the story of the Red Ball Express is, at its heart, a human story. It's the story of the men who gripped the steering wheels and stared into the darkness, night after night. And in the segregated United States Army of 1944, they were largely relegated to engineering, quartermaster, and transportation corps. They were the service and support troops, deemed unfit for the supposed glory of battle. The Red Ball Express transformed these service roles into one of the most vital and hazardous jobs of the war. This was their front line. The life of a Red Ball driver was a grueling ordeal of profound exhaustion, often 48 hours or more with only a few catnaps in the passenger seat or by the side of the road. They drove through suffocating clouds of dust kicked up by the convoy, and the danger was constant. Though the front line had moved on, the French countryside was not safe. German snipers and bypassed pockets of resistance still lurked in the forests and villages, taking potshots at the vital convoys. The Luftwaffe, though weakened, would occasionally send fighters to strafe the seemingly endless lines of trucks, turning the highway into a shooting gallery. But the greatest enemy was often exhaustion itself. Drivers spoke of ghost driving. Beyond the enemy, there was the war against the machines themselves. Breakdowns were constant. In these moments, the drivers became their own mechanics, often cannibalizing parts from trucks that had been wrecked or abandoned. Their ingenuity and resilience were legendary. The camaraderie born on those dark, dangerous roads was powerful. Act 4: the legacy of the Red Ball. The impact of the Red Ball Express was immediate and profound. They delivered everything: fuel, ammunition, food, medical supplies, and mail from home. They were the circulatory system of the Allied invasion force. They fueled the liberation of Paris. The Express was always intended to be a temporary solution. As the port of Antwerp was finally cleared and opened in late November, and as engineers painstakingly repaired the French railway lines, the need for the massive truck convoys diminished. The trucks and their drivers were reassigned, but the legacy of the Red Ball Express extends far beyond mere tonnage. It became a powerful symbol of the crucial, often overlooked. It proved that a war is won not only by the soldiers who pull the triggers, but by the vast, complex network of people who support them. Most importantly, it was a landmark chapter in the history of African Americans in the U.S. military. The exemplary performance and unwavering dedication of these drivers was undeniable proof of their skill and patriotism. It was a powerful argument against the flawed logic of segregation, and it played a significant role in the discussions that would ultimately lead President Truman to desegregate the armed forces in 1948. The story of the Red Ball Express is more than a tale of trucks and supplies. It is a story of resilience, of ingenuity in the face of crisis, and of the quiet, unyielding heroism of ordinary men who were asked to do an extraordinary job, and in doing so, paved the highway to victory.